We assume the earth is solid rock, dead, inanimate. We drill into it, we blast it with dynamite, and we steal its riches. But what if the earth isn't dead? What if the ground beneath our feet is just skin, and we are the parasites burrowing into it? In 1907, the Monongah Mine Disaster killed 300 men. History books say it was a methane explosion. They lied. I have the foreman's journal. It wasn't gas that killed them, it was what they woke up. For the next 90 minutes, we are going to descend 3 miles down into the crushing dark to find out why the miners of shaft number 9 started screaming 3 days before the explosion. West Virginia, 1907. The Black Creek Mining Company was known for one thing: greed. The owner, Mr. Nine Sterling, wanted to beat the record for the deepest coal shaft in America. He pushed his men to dig past the safety limits, ignoring the geology reports. The town around the mine was a ghost town even when people lived there. Everything was covered in soot. The trees were black. The river ran black. It was a place where hope came to die. The men who worked there were tough immigrants, ex-convicts, men with nothing to lose. But even they were afraid of Shaft 9. The man in charge of the dig was Foreman Silas. They called him the Iron Man because he allegedly survived a tunnel collapse in '98 by eating rats for a week. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in quotas. On October 12th, Silas noted in his logbook that the drilling team had hit a new layer of rock at 2,000 feet. It wasn't limestone or granite. It was soft, porous, and it was red. Silas wrote, "The rock feels wrong. It's warm to the touch. And when we strike it, it doesn't sound like stone clashing on stone. It sounds like a wet thud." Every morning the men entered the cage, a rattling iron box suspended by a single steel cable. The descent to the bottom took 20 minutes. As they went deeper, the temperature should have dropped, but in Shaft 9, it rose. At 2 miles down, the air became heavy. It wasn't just hot, it was humid, sticky. The miners complained that the air tasted metallic, like chewing on a penny. They weren't just descending into a mine anymore. It felt like they were being swallowed. They were sliding down the throat of the world. At the bottom of the shaft, the digging stopped. They had hit the barrier. It wasn't coal. It was a wall of deep, dark, red material. When a young miner named Jack swung his pickaxe, it didn't chip the rock. The axe got stuck. Silas walked over and touched the wall. He pulled his hand back in shock. It was warm, pulsing with a faint heat. He pressed his thumb against it, and the rocks indented slightly, like stiff rubber. It wasn't stone, it was tissue. But Silas, blinded by the quota, ordered them to drill through it. In the old days, miners used canaries to detect carbon monoxide. If the bird died, you ran. But in Shaft 9, the birds didn't die, they went insane. On the morning of October 14th, the miners noticed the birds were throwing themselves against the bars of their cages. They were chirping frantically, but not a normal song. It was a high-pitched shriek. When Jack tried to cover the cage to calm them, he saw it. The bird had pecked its own eyes out. It was still alive, blind and bleeding, hopping in circles. The animals knew something was coming up the shaft. Silas wouldn't listen to the warnings. He ordered the men to blast through the red layer. When the dynamite didn't arrive on time, he ordered them to use pickaxes. A burly miner named Thomas stepped up. He raised his axe and swung it with all his might into the soft, porous wall. There was no spark, no crack of stone, just a wet, tearing sound. And then, the spray. A jet of hot, dark fluid erupted from the gash in the rock, coating Thomas's face. He dropped the axe and screamed. It wasn't water. The crew backed away, shining their lamps on the oozing wall. The fluid didn't act like oil or groundwater. It was thick, viscous. It moved slowly down the wall like molasses. Jack knelt to look at the puddle forming on the floor. "It's not spreading," he whispered. "It's clumping." The liquid was coagulating. It was reacting to the air, turning into a dark, gelatinous scab. And the heat radiating from it was intense. The tunnel temperature spiked to 110 degrees in minutes. Then came the smell. It started as a faint, metallic tang, like old copper coins. But as the fluid continued to weep from the wall, the scent grew overpowering. It smelled like iron, like raw meat left out in the sun, like a slaughterhouse floor. The men started retching. The air was so thick with the metallic stench that you could taste it on your tongue. Silas tied a rag around his face, his eyes watering. "It's just mineral deposits!" he shouted, but his voice shook. He knew minerals didn't smell like death. Thomas, the man who struck the wall, fell to his knees. He was clawing at his face. "It burns!" he screamed. "Get it off me!" The fluid wasn't just hot, it was caustic. It was acting like stomach acid. Where it touched his skin, it left angry, red blisters. The earth wasn't just bleeding, it was fighting back. It was a biological defense mechanism. Just like our bodies produce acid to kill bacteria, the mountain was producing this fluid to burn away the parasites. And the parasites were them. Silas ordered the medic to help Thomas, but then everything stopped. The ground beneath their boots shifted, not a shake, but a throb. Ba-dum. Dust fell from the ceiling. Ba. It was a rhythm. Slow, deep, massive. It resonated through the soles of their shoes and rattled the fillings in their teeth. The miners looked at each other in absolute terror. They weren't standing in a tunnel of rock, they were standing inside a cavity. And whatever they were inside of had just woken up. The heartbeat wasn't the end. It was the alarm. Just as your body reacts to a splinter, the earth reacted to us. The red walls began to spasm. All along the tunnel, small vertical slits opened up in the rock. They looked like gills breathing. Thick, clear mucus spilled out of them, pooling on the floor. Jack grabbed Silas's arm. "Boss, look!" he pointed. Something was moving inside the slits. Something pale and wet was pushing its way out. The mountain was birthing them. The first one fell onto the tunnel floor with a wet slap. It wasn't an animal. It didn't look like anything that evolved in nature. It was pale, translucent, and about the size of a large dog. It had no eyes. It didn't need them. It had no legs, just a muscular, slug-like body that rippled as it moved. But the mouth was a perfect circle of vibrating bristles. Silas raised his pickaxe. "Stay back!" he yelled. The creature didn't roar. It didn't hiss. It just turned its faceless head toward the heat of the lanterns. It moved faster than a snake. Before anyone could react, it launched itself at Thomas, the man who was already burned. It didn't bite him. It slammed into his leg and dissolved. The creature's body lost its shape, spreading over Thomas's leg like living wax. Thomas screamed as the thing began to digest him right through his clothes. It wasn't eating him. It was assimilating him. It was a white blood cell attacking a virus. And to the earth, Thomas was just a germ that needed to be neutralized. Silas swung his pickaxe, severing the creature from Thomas's leg, but the damage was done. The flesh was gone, stripped down to the bone. Then they heard it. The sound of wet slapping echoing from deeper in the darkness. Slap, 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 hundreds of them. Jack shone his light down the tunnel. The floor was moving. It was a sea of pale, writhing bodies pouring out of every crack and crevice. "Run!" Silas roared. "Get to the cage!" The crew scrambled back toward the elevator shaft, dragging the injured Thomas. But the mine was changing. The floor, which had been solid rock an hour ago, was now soft and tacky. It felt like running through drying glue. Their boots sank inches deep with every step, slowing them down. The tunnel was trying to hold them in place. Behind them, the sound of the swarm grew louder. They weren't just being chased, they were being herded. The earth didn't want them to leave, it wanted to keep them. Breathing hard, the crew reached the main shaft. The elevator cage was there, sitting on the floor where they left it. Jack scrambled inside and yanked the signal lever. "Pull us up! Pull us up!" he screamed. Nothing happened. The cage didn't jerk. The cable didn't tighten. Silas shone his lantern upward into the endless dark. 50 feet up, the thick steel cable was dangling loose. It hadn't snapped from tension. The end of it was tapered and dripping, glowing red. It had been dissolved. The acid from the walls had eaten through the lifeline. Silence fell over the group, broken only by the distant slap-slap of the approaching creatures. They were 3 miles underground. No ladder, no radio, no way out. Silas dropped his hand. He looked at the walls around them, which were now pulsing faster. "It knows," he whispered. "It didn't just attack us. It cut off our retreat." The earth wasn't reacting blindly like an animal. It was reacting intelligently like an immune system. It had isolated the infection to prevent it from spreading to the surface. The sound of the swarm was getting louder. They were minutes away. "We can't go up," Silas barked, snapping back to reality. "So we hold the line here." They raided the supply depot near the shaft. They dragged heavy crates of dynamite, timber beams, and loose rock to build a makeshift wall across the tunnel entrance. It wasn't much, but it was the only thing standing between them and the white things. Jack loaded his shotgun, a bird gun he kept for rats. "Aim for the mouths," Silas said. "It's the only soft spot they have." As they waited behind the barricade, the heat became a physical weight. The temperature spiked to 130 degrees. It wasn't just the air, the rock itself was radiating heat. The men were gasping, their skin red and raw. "It's a fever," Jack wheezed, pouring the last of his canteen water over his head. The steam rose instantly. The earth was doing exactly what a human body does when fighting a virus. It was raising its internal temperature to cook the intruder alive. They were being boiled in the mountain sweat. Heatstroke set in quickly. The dehydration and the toxic air began to play tricks on their minds. Thomas, currently dying from his leg wound, started talking to his mother, who had been dead for 10 years. Even Silas wasn't immune. In the flickering shadows beyond the barricade, he saw shapes. Not the white worms, but people. Men he had lost in the '98 collapse. They were standing in the red sludge, beckoning him. The heartbeat of the mountain, ba-dum, began to sound like words. "Sleep, sleep, join us." The hallucination ended with a crash. The swarm hit the barricade. It wasn't a disorganized attack. They hit the crates with the force of a battering ram. The timber groaned and splintered. Through the gaps in the rocks, the men could see them, a wall of pale, wet flesh pressing against the other side. They were climbing over each other, a mindless wave of biological eradicators. "Hold the wall!" Silas screamed, throwing his shoulder against a crate that was being pushed in. The mountain was trying to crush them. One of the creatures managed to squeeze through a gap near the ceiling. It dropped into the safe zone, hissing like a steam valve. Jack didn't hesitate. He raised his bird gun and pulled both triggers. Boom! The sound was deafening in the confined space. The buckshot hit the creature square in its circular mouth, blowing it backward. It exploded in a spray of white, milky fluid. For a second, the men cheered. They could be killed. They bled. but they didn't know that killing them was a mistake. The cheer died in their throats. The white fluid splattered from the dead creature wasn't just blood, it was a concentrated enzyme. Wherever it landed, on the floor, on the rocks, on the wooden crates, it began to eat through the material. The barricade hissed violently. The thick timber beams turned to black sludge in seconds. By killing one, Jack had inadvertently destroyed their only shield. "It melts through everything," Jack yelled, reloading with shaking hands. "We can't shoot them this close." The heat, the noise, and the claustrophobia were too much. Miller, the youngest of the crew after Jack, simply broke. He stopped holding the wall. He dropped his shovel. A strange, peaceful smile spread across his soot-covered face. "Don't you hear it?" he asked softly, ignoring the monsters clawing at the wood. "The mountain. It wants to forgive us. It just wants to hug us." The fever had cooked his brain. Before Silas could grab him, Miller walked straight toward the dissolving barricade. He wanted to go back to the womb. "No, Miller!" Silas lunged, but he was too late. Miller didn't attack the creatures, he welcomed them. He pulled away a melting crate to let them in. The barricade collapsed. Miller was instantly buried under a wave of pale, wet bodies. He didn't scream, he laughed as they dissolved him. With the wall gone, the swarm poured into the small pocket of safety. Silas grabbed Jack by the collar and shoved him backward. "Fall back," he roared, "to the explosive cache." "It's the only place left." They ran. Jack, Silas, and the last two survivors scrambled deeper into the dead-end drift where the explosives were stored. But the mine wasn't just chasing them, it was crushing them. The tunnel began to contract. The walls bulged inward with every heartbeat of the mountain. Bar, dum, squeeze, bar, dum, squeeze. It was exactly like being inside an esophagus. The earth was trying to swallow the irritant. The air pressure spiked, popping their ears. They weren't fighting a monster, they were fighting anatomy. They threw themselves into the explosive magazine, a small room carved out of the rock face meant to store blasting caps. Silas slammed the heavy iron door shut and spun the locking wheel. Clang! For a second, there was silence. Then came the impact. The swarm hit the door on the other side. The metal groaned and dented inward. They were trapped in a box of high explosives with 1,000 acid-blooded monsters scratching at the paint. Jack was looking for a ventilation shaft, a way out. "We can climb the air vent," he panicked. "Sit down, Jack," Silas said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "There is no way out. Don't you get it yet?" Silas looked at the red sludge staining his hands. "We dug too deep. We broke the skin. Those things out there, they aren't evil. They are white blood cells. And we are the virus. If we escape, we take the infection to the surface. And then the earth cleans the surface too." The banging on the iron door got louder. The metal was beginning to hiss and smoke. The acid was eating through. Silas didn't look at the door. He pried open a crate of TNT. He took a coil of wire and a blasting cap. "We have enough powder here to collapse the entire lower level," Silas said. "It will seal the wound, it will kill the antibodies, and it will bury the secret." He looked at his men. "I won't order you to do this, but it's the only way to save your families up there." The iron door gave way. A hole the size of a man melted through the center. A pale, eyeless face pushed into the room, its circular teeth vibrating. Jack didn't shoot. He dropped his gun and stood next to Silas. He put his hand over Silas's hand on the plunger. The other two men joined them, 4 dirty hands on one handle. "For Black Creek," Jack whispered. Silas nodded. The creature shrieked and lunged. "For the world," Silas said. and they pushed down. The explosion didn't sound like dynamite, it sounded like a scream. On November 13th, at 10,000 AM, the ground beneath Black Creek buckled. It wasn't a normal shockwave. Witnesses said the mountain seemed to heave upward, as if something buried deep inside was gagging. Then came the collapse. Shaft number 9 imploded. Millions of tons of rock crashed down, sealing the tunnel, the creatures, and the brave men who triggered it. The wound was cauterized. For 3 days, ash fell on the town like snow. But it wasn't just coal dust, it was sticky. It smelled of copper and burnt meat. The official report was released immediately. Methane pocket explosion, accidental ignition, no survivors. The Sterling Coal Company paid $50 to each widow and ordered the mine to be filled with concrete. They didn't want anyone digging up the bodies. Or perhaps they didn't want anyone to see what the bodies had become. But Silas had left something behind. Before the final shift, he had left his personal logbook with his wife, telling her to hide it if he didn't come back. She buried it under the floorboards of their shack. For 100 years, the wood rotted, but the truth survived. The ink describes the red wall, the heat, the heartbeat, and the antibodies. It warns us that we are walking on thin skin, and that if we scratch it too hard, the immune system will wake up again. Time makes us forget fear. It's been over a century. The Sterling Coal Company is gone, bought out by a massive geothermal energy conglomerate called TerraCore. They looked at the old maps. They saw the heat readings from 1907 and saw dollar signs. They don't believe in myths. They believe in clean, infinite energy from the Earth's core. Last week, they set up a new rig right on top of the old Shaft 9. They call it Project Deep Earth. I call it suicide. Yesterday, the drilling began. At 2 miles down, the sensors picked up an anomaly. The rock was soft. The sample was flown to the TerraCore mobile lab at the base of the mountain. Dr. Aris, the lead geologist, expected to find iron oxide or sulfur bacteria. He placed the red sludge into a centrifuge. It didn't separate. He tried to heat it. It didn't evaporate. It absorbed the heat. "This isn't a mineral," Aris told his team, staring at the vial. "It's responding to stimuli." The fluid was moving inside the glass, pushing against the stopper. It wasn't just a substance, it was an organism. Curiosity is dangerous. Aris decided to mix a drop of the sample with human blood on a slide. He looked through the microscope. What he saw made him recoil. The red earth cells didn't just mix, they attacked. They latched onto the human cells and tore them apart, replicating instantly. It was the most aggressive immune response he had ever seen. "It thinks we are the pathogen," Aris whispered, "and it's designed to wipe us out." He reached for the phone to call the rig, to tell them to stop drilling. But he never made the call. In his haste, Aris knocked the vial off the table. It shattered. A single splash of the red fluid hit his wrist, just above the latex glove. The reaction was immediate. No incubation period, no fever, just immediate necrosis. Aris screamed as the fluid hissed, burrowing into his flesh. It wasn't burning him like acid anymore, it was rewriting him. The veins in his arm turned black, bulging visibly as the cure raced toward his heart. The security guard rushed in, but it was too late. Aris wasn't dying, he was changing. The 1907 miners were dissolved, but the modern strain was faster. It repurposed the host. Aris's skin lost its color, turning pale and translucent. His eyes rolled back, dissolving into white jelly. He let out a sound that wasn't human, a high-pitched shriek. He was no longer a scientist. He was the first modern antibody. The Earth had learned how to use our own bodies against us. At the same moment Aris turned, the drilling rig alarms began to blare. The sensors were picking up a vibration from deep underground. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic. B-A-D-U-M! B-A-D-U-M! The site manager stared at the screen in horror. The vibrations matched the spikes from the 1907 records exactly. The drill hadn't just hit a pocket of fluid, it had pricked the skin of the beast. And now, 3 miles down, the swarm was waking up. The warning from the past was ignored. Now, the harvest begins. The warning came too late. The vibrations stopped, replaced by a low, grinding groan. Then the mountains simply let go. A sinkhole, 300 feet wide, opened up directly beneath the TerraCore rig. It wasn't a collapse, it was a swallow. The million-ton steel tower groaned as its supports snapped like toothpicks, with a deafening crash that shook the valley. The entire operation, the drill, the control room, and the crew slid backward into the throat of the earth. History wasn't just repeating itself, it was feeding. The fall stopped at 500 feet, caught on a ledge of the old mine shaft. The rig was a twisted skeleton of steel. Inside the wreckage, the emergency power kicked in. Blue strobe lights pulsed in the dust-choked darkness. The surviving engineers coughed, checking their radios. Static. Their GPS was dead. Their high-tech sensors were blind. They had tablets, satellite phones, and thermal cameras, but down here, they were just soft meat in a tin can. And just beyond the ring of blue light, the walls began to hiss. TerraCore had prepared for eco-terrorists, not biology. The private security team drew their weapons as the pale shapes slithered over the wreckage. "Open fire!" the commander screamed. Automatic gunfire lit up the cavern. Bullets tore into the creatures, but it was like shooting water balloons. They just splashed and reformed, or ignored the wounds entirely. You can't shoot a white blood cell. The swarm surged forward, engulfing the soldiers. Their Kevlar vests didn't stop the digestion. The screams of the men were drowned out by the wet sound of absorption. While the rig crew died below, the real threat was already on the surface. The mobile lad, knocked over by the quake, lay on its side near the tree line. The doors hadn't been opened by rescuers. They had been torn off their hinges from the inside. Dr. Aris, or the thing that used to be Dr. Aris, was gone. He hadn't fallen into the hole. He had crawled into the forest. The infection had breached containment. The antibody was loose in the ecosystem, looking for more hosts to cure. At the USGS monitoring station in Colorado, the screens lit up. The vibration from Black Creek wasn't fading, it was amplifying. But then a second alarm rang. A similar vibration was detected in a diamond mine in Siberia. Then another in a deep-sea trench off Japan. Bah! Dumb! Bah! The scientists realized with horror that the signals were synchronized. The injury in West Virginia hadn't just woken up one mountain. It had sent a distress signal through the tectonic plates. The entire immune system of the planet was waking up. It entered the groundwater. It entered the roots. Within days, the forest around Black Creek changed. The trees didn't die, they mutated. Their bark softened into scab-like tissue. Their sap turned to red sludge. The animals that drank from the stream were rewritten. Hunters reported deer that didn't run, wolves that dissolved into piles of white jelly when shot. The immune system wasn't just targeting humans anymore, it was targeting the biosphere that supported us. It was sterilizing the environment. Then came the weather patterns. Massive thermal vents opened up in the Pacific, spewing tons of the red organic matter into the atmosphere. It didn't snow. It rained blood. Not human blood, but the Earth's enzyme. In Tokyo, London, and New York, the red mist descended. It clogged engines, it poisoned reservoirs, and where it touched skin, the process began. Hospitals were overwhelmed within hours. The fever wasn't a disease, it was the planet raising its temperature to kill the bacteria. And we were the bacteria. The ground war began a week later. The seismic signals synchronized. All at once, the Earth flinched. Major fault lines didn't just shift, they opened. Los Angeles, Istanbul, Mexico City. They didn't crumble, they were consumed. Witnesses said the ground looked like it was chewing. The cities that we built, the concrete scars on the planet's surface, were pulled down into the magma. The Earth was scrubbing its skin. It was removing the parasites and their nests. The screaming stopped on the 30th day. The grid went down. The satellites went dark. The last transmission from the ISS showed a marble that wasn't blue and green anymore. It was a bruised purple and red. I am recording this on a battery-powered loop. If anyone is left, don't dig, don't build. Walk lightly. The fever has broken. The patient has survived, but the infection, the civilization of man, has been cured. 100 years later, the air is clean. The water is clear. The scars we made are gone, covered by a new, strange garden of red leaves and white flowers. The heartbeat deep underground has slowed down. Ba, dum, ba, ba, ba. It is sleeping again. The Earth is at peace. It serves as a reminder to anything that might evolve next. You are not the owner of this planet. You are just a guest. And if you overstay your welcome, the host will wake up.